This week, Richard Reinders is with us to talk about the lengths vendors will go to for a spot on your calendar. Then Ryan Kalember, EVP Cybersecurity Strategy from Proofpoint, joins us to talk about cyber criminals shifting tactics. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Orca Security raises all the money. Privacy engineering firms hit their funding stride. McAfee and FireEye merge, but where's RSA's dance partner? Akamai acquires Guardicore. NetApp picks up Cloud Checker. SPDX becomes the ISO standard for S-bombs. Facebook shares details on how they accidentally Thanos snapped themselves. All that, our weekly squirrel, and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Whether your biggest cybersecurity concern is ransomware, unprotected network devices, zero trust success, or auditing your supply chains, firmware security is critical. Eclipsium's enterprise firmware security platform helps you identify devices and their firmware, verify the integrity of firmware wherever it's used, and fortify firmware throughout active remediation and automated patching. Visit securityweekly.com/Eclipsium to try out Eclipsium or learn more about enterprise firmware security. Did you know that 81% of data breaches are caused by weak password security? Keeper Security's easy-to-use password manager platform keeps your passwords safe, easy to share, and out of reach of cyber criminals. Keeper is the leading cybersecurity platform for preventing password-related data breaches and cyber threats. Check out Keeper and get a free 3-year Keeper Password Manager solution when you take a demo of Keeper for Business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Keeper Security.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is episode 245, recorded on Wednesday, October 6th, 2021. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is Mr. Tyler Shields.
Good afternoon, Adrian. Good to see you again.
Likewise, busy in hair and makeup, just to put on a hat there.
Yeah, you know, it takes me a while to get this face. Yeah, no, it takes me a while to get this face to look as good as it does. So, you know, just saying.
Also, with more of your guitarists join us today. Are they guest hosts?
100% the star of the show. I'm kind of worthless on the show, but these amazingly overexposed guitars will come along. And actually, in 2 seconds, next time you cut away from me, I'm going to close some windows and see if it makes it a little better. But we'll get there on the set someday, I promise.
Yeah, that's what I have to do over here. I have to close up all the windows, otherwise everything just gets blown out. Is that a mandolin you have there?
This guy over here?
Ukulele? Yeah.
That's actually an electric ukulele. I can plug it into my amplifiers that I have down here and play electric ukulele.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Also with us today, Mr. Paul Asadorian is soldering stuff, trying to recover some hardware, soldering on some JTAG. I believe, or a serial port, something like that. So in his place, we have another Tyler with us. We have Mr. Tyler Robinson. Welcome.
Uh-oh. 2 Tylers on the show at one time is dangerous, especially when Paul's soldering and, you know, we're providing remote support for that solder effort.
A very solid crew. I don't think we're missing anything today. I think we're well equipped for today's interviews and the news today, all of which I'm very excited about. But before we get into those, InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on Digital Pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register now. All right, so for our first interview today, we're really excited to have Richard Reinders.
You know, I know we talked about this because I know you cared about this.
We did, and I made a pronunciation note, but at the very top, the original announcement, and I failed to copy it down here.
As soon as you get that stuck in your head, you know immediately you're going to screw it up. And oh my God, Speaking of screw ups, look at that awful lighting.
lighting didn't quite work out, but anyways, it's Richard Reinders, and thanks for having me on in the first place. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So you're the head of security at Gravity Payments, and prior to that, you've had a pretty interesting history. You held security roles at Sisu, Looker, Yahoo, always an interesting one, and you were there at an interesting time and spent some time in the financial services industry.
Yeah, managed to stay busy. I'm trying to collect all the verticals over time. Right now, I'm at a payment processing company, Gravity. I think the big thing that people might know us for is that we really care about our merchants and try and pay every single employee at least $70K a year, regardless of the role that might normally not get paid that much. And I'm there for about 6 months now, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, our backgrounds mirror a little bit. I actually got my start in payment processing. That's where I started out on the IT side and actually made the transition into security. And before that, I did tech support. And I understand you also did some tech support. Very humbling job, and I think a good perspective to have for some of the topics we're going into today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did help the support for the old Palm handhelds. People might remember those. You get a lot of people calling in with all kinds of things, and you start to understand and appreciate work like that a lot better and what people are running into. And same with doing support for Toshiba laptops. So it's been very interesting, and I think it's actually really helped in security as well.
And at the time you were doing that, I don't think we talked, but I had a Toshiba laptop, and I was a huge fan of Palm. I actually, at that point, I might have had a Sony Clie, but I was a big fan of those devices.
Yeah, they were actually pretty handy for what they did, and the battery life would just go forever. And I wish we could have that today.
Yeah, 2 AAA batteries would last me about a month in a PDA. And it really did everything I needed. Calendar, notes, stuff like that. But I actually did internet tech support, dial-up and DSL support, which was very challenging because the thing you were trying to help people with, they couldn't use, at least in the dial-up days, while they're on the phone with you. So you would do your best to fix their problem, and then you'd both hang up. Pretty much guaranteed if they call back, they're not going to get you again. So very, very challenging situation for tech support. And I think really helped give me some empathy and understand, how to work with people better. You get to work with such a range of folks.
Yeah, you realize some things are not so obvious, and you try and take care of the help desk person who's going to come after you so you don't set them up for failure. And a lot of those values you can apply across the board and in security as well.
So today the topic is cybersecurity sales, and it's I think in general it has a lot of things in common with sales in other industries, but there's certain things that there's some negative prompts that sales folks will take in this industry. Like, for example, when a breach occurs. You'll see a lot of a lot of folks out there will get emails in their inbox usually the same day that some kind of breach occurs that hey, we could have prevented that for you. So I think some of those experiences are what really prompted the conversation today.
Yeah, I think some of those past experiences and then some things that came up just this week really prompted that. And maybe because the Twitch topic came up, I feel really bad for the security professionals at Twitch right now trying to deal with everything they're going through and their breach. And I'm sure they're getting inundated with messages and all forms of outreach. I remember when I was at Yahoo, I was team lead for incident response. And the CISO and the rest of the company announced we had in previous years one of the biggest breaches in the history of the world. And my inbox just got overrun with messages from people. And like one of them was from a company, a security vendor whose product we'd actually had used at Yahoo when those breaches were going on. They said, well, if you use our product, you wouldn't have had this breach. And well, we had been using their product and it didn't prevent it. And it just kind of gives you a bad taste in your mouth. And sometimes salespeople, they see an opportunity and they haven't really thought through what's the right moment, what's the right approach. Like I had somebody reach out and say, "Oh, I need to get in the room of leadership," who, well, obviously they're a little busy at this point. And so I was like, "Okay, well, what do you want to say? What do you want to do? How can you assist?" And they hadn't really considered that. But yeah, this week I had two forms of outreach through email that I was like, "Oh, this is kind of like a dark pattern almost. I wish people didn't do that." And I think that kind of got us started on this conversation.
Yeah, so I think this is a perfect point to hand over to Tyler to maybe explain the sales funnel a bit, and the SDR role and why maybe some of these companies end up going down these paths and we end up having these conversations.
Yeah. Wow, this is probably one of the most loaded topics that I've heard as a cyber marketer, which I've been now for.
That's why I handed it off to you.
Yeah, exactly. You want to dodge the bullets. You'll let me take them face on.
I'll take them. I just thought you'd have a good perspective on it. You spent more time in that role than I have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate them, and it's definitely a tricky subject, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you have to balance the business needs, right? And the business needs to generate business, because at the end of the day, all these cyber vendors and cybersecurity companies are business generating entities, revenue generating entities. You have to balance that with the expectation of not coming across as too selly, not coming across as ambulance chasing, not coming across as shoveling fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but simultaneously you have to manage, bring business into the structure. So there's always a fine line between cold calling, not cold calling, or sending cold emails, not sending cold emails. And you couple that with then the privacy and, like GDPR type implications, and the water is getting so murky. I've recently seen some threads out there. I don't remember if it was in a cyber marketers chat or what we were in, but we were discussing the impacts of these people that have now gone to LinkedIn, and they're frequently posting on LinkedIn, "Hey, stop calling me company X. I'm going to out you to the world," right? And then you get that pile-on effect of it happening, right? Where company X gets 50, 60 comments. You're blasting, spamming, blah blah blah, and they may or may not be. I'm not necessarily suggesting that company X in that particular case was being a good steward. But it's so easy to trip over that line these days that it makes it difficult to be a cyber marketer in a general sense, and to create outreach that's effective yet respectful. And that's the goal of every CMO in the position that I'm in, is we have to create outreach, we have to create brand, we have to create interest in our product in a respectful way. And generally, I find that if you are attempting to do that the best you can, most of the time the audience is receptive to it.
And I think this is really tough too, right? Because every person receiving this is going to receive things differently. So that funny message that's totally going to connect with some percentage, some other percentage is going to respond to that and be like, "Oh, that's goofy. Why are you messaging me this nonsense?" and so on. And it's just a very difficult thing. And I think people doing that outreach, it's a very difficult job to be in. But I think it might be interesting to dive into what that marketing funnel looks like for people, and kind of what that outreach looks like. So you kind of know what an SDR person is dealing with, right? Like you try and have this repeatable sales motion, right? And you kind of know how many people are going to fall out of your funnel at different stages, whether it's, evaluating the product or negotiating price or whatever the case may be. And so when you have your repeatable motion figured out, how many people you got to get into the funnel in order to get to some kind of X outcome. And you can get people into the funnel in many different ways, whether it's a conference booth or something else. But one of those ways is doing outreach to go and find that ideal customer profile that could benefit from your product, and then saying, "Okay, let me send them a message." And then the SDR is doing that. They have a lot of tools at their disposal. Like sometimes people wonder, maybe, why am I getting 5 emails? Why am I getting 8 emails in sequence from this person? Well, it's not this individual writing one message for you every single time. They have tools that set up the sequence of events, of communications and messaging, and they kind of run you through that. And hopefully one of those messages connects, and you go and respond to that. Of course, sometimes those messages kind of have the opposite effect.
Yeah, to give a little bit of inside baseball for those cybersecurity practitioners that are watching or listening, either one today. We kind of in marketing, we think of the marketing funnel literally as a funnel where you have the top of the funnel. We dump in contacts. Contacts can be pure raw cold contacts, but you have to be careful of overly contacting and spamming someone who never asked to be opted in. Then you have kind of this structure called leads or subscribers where they're opted into what you're putting out from a marketing material standpoint. And out the bottom of the funnel, you get what's called marketing qualified leads. Now, between the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel, there's a process that has to occur called nurturing. And that process is the process that can backfire if you do it wrong. If you're talking to someone that's at the top of the funnel, has a 0 lead score, meaning they've never ever interacted with you, you have to be very, very careful of how you contact them. You can't just spam them with a bunch of stuff from your mailing list. A, it's against GDPR. B, it's going to put a bad taste in their mouth. There's a lot of problems with that. But you have to try to get those people down the funnel, score them, make them interact with you so that at the end of the day, they can understand who you are, what you bring to the table, and if they're interested in buying the product. And I think that process is the process that cyber marketers have to make sure we get right. And the key here that I found to be successful, and I have no idea how far you guys want me to go into this, but what I found to be very successful in cyber marketing in general is actually not trying to sell. It's really providing value to the audience being our database of contacts that we're marketing to, providing value to them in every touch that we do. Hey, we just put out this really cool blog post that talks about how to use our product to do X, Y, and Z. Here's the technical how we do it. Right? That actually provides value to them. Or here's a news article and our CTO's evaluation of the results of that news article that you may find interesting. If you approach cyber marketing with we're going to provide you with something that's useful to you, you build up really good brand empathy. And that's how I've been successful over the last decade or so as a cyber marketer.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Like as a recipient, if somebody's done the research and it's relevant to me, I'm going to be reading that, if it gets me thinking, I appreciate that, and if it provides me value, I kind of feel like I owe you one, like you did something good for me. And it makes me think, okay, how can this product help me in the organization? Because at the end of the day, like as a security professional, I want to keep the organization as safe as possible, help reduce risk, help things go well. And, a product that can help make life better, whether it's for the company, the team, customers, keeping them safe, then that's going to be of interest. And what's interesting as well is, you get all kinds of outreach. It's not just salespeople that do the outreach, right? Like, for example, most companies have a security email address, and you'll get people from all walks of life reaching out, and they may tell you about that they're aware of an issue in your environment, or maybe it's a peer that's telling you something. And you always have to take that outreach on risks and vulnerabilities seriously, no matter the source. Maybe that's something that's worth putting in a bug bounty program and rewarding them for. And so when somebody starts pointing out, something that could be of risk to the organization, could be a vulnerability, security professionals often respond out of care and concern, and even if the majority of those cases are dead ends, it's worth following up on. And, security professionals have to have the ability to know that they're not always going to be perfect. They're not going to be aware of 100% of everything. And so sometimes that kind of thing is where, you're going to get your insights from. Now, of course, if you get outreach from a vendor, trying to point stuff like that out, you want it to be actually an issue and not a false alarm. And that's that kind of fine line to tread. How do you provide value and not that fear?
Yeah, one other thing too, since we're going back and forth kind of on this topic, one of the things that I've learned is to be extremely respectful of requests for removal. And what I mean by that is not just, okay, I removed them from a couple of sequences. Like if they say unsub, or if they click unsub, or they say, hey, I want out, or please stop contacting me, remove them immediately. Be respectful of that. Make sure you have an actual process that not only just removes them from one or two things, but gets them the hell off of all of it, right? Last thing you want to do is ever hit somebody after they've asked to be removed, because it just makes your company look like an amateur hour joke. So you really have to make sure you get that right as well.
Yeah, because what will happen is that outreach will fall apart, or the security professional says this is not relevant, I don't want to have it anymore. And what they'll do is they'll slide you onto some nurture track where every week you're getting an email from them that's a generalized marketing email, and it really may not be what they're looking for. And it's tough because you want to keep opportunities or people that you can nurture into an opportunity alive as long as possible.
And I think part of the problem there is the metrics that they're getting, tell them that they're having some success, by pestering people. This I kind of think of it as, this sales method as wearing people down. There's this school of sales that, there's a minimum number of touch points you need to reach before, you've softened them up enough, I guess, to land the sale.
That's the lure of polarizing messages, right? Like you get a higher response rate, and so you think like you're doing something right, but you may also be ticking off a larger group of people than that you wouldn't have normally ticked off, which is also going to run into spam reporting and things like that.
Yeah.
And there's one other thought though, because even though like we can get into some examples of bad outreach, on the flip side, is a security professional going to really not use the right product for their environment if they happen to not like a marketing message? I'd like to think that a security professional can get over their own feelings and really say, okay, this is the right thing for the organization, regardless of how I feel about how that salesperson rubbed me the wrong way or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen a lot of CISOs where that's kind of a hard fail for them. If the sales ethics are kind of questionable, like the example you're talking about earlier, where somebody was it sounded like somebody was using like a vulnerability disclosure process to try and sell you something. Like for some people, like they're just going to cross you off that list, and cut you out, even if you do have a decent product.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I have heard the same thing. Actually, let me give you the two examples that kind of that happened on the same day that kind of got me thinking, like, okay, this is worth kind of talking about at this point. So I had one person email saying that we had attack surface, and so I'm like, all right, let's go see what our attack surface is. They said their product was going to go identify risk and exposure, and they included a screenshot. And the screenshot said, had these pie charts, high, medium, low, and they all said 0. And so, I ended up responding because I'm like, what if I'm missing something here? And they're aware of something that I don't realize. Maybe there's a mistake with the picture or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, what are the risks you identified? Like, what's going on? And their response was like, well, at this time, we have not detected any priorities that need to be addressed. But hey, you want to go talk to a salesperson? And to me, that's kind of a turnoff, right? Like you haven't shown value to me. You got me worried about something, and then it turned out it was nothing. And that one I didn't like so much. Another one that I had was, keep in mind, I was on vacation for a little bit. Somebody started up their sequence of outreach, sending these messages. I didn't really respond. I was on vacation, and I come back and basically this Monday I got an email saying, oh, I ran a security scan, and in bold it said, we found a low performance score with your security. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds serious. Let's follow up. And so I responded asking for info, like, what are the security issues that exist? Because, I want to resolve them, and I'm still waiting for a response. It's just kind of using fear to try and elicit a response. But if you have no value to provide, it's kind of it's a turnoff. It's frustrating, Yeah. And so that's the kind of thing that I wish we wouldn't do.
Yeah, the key you said there is if it's of no value, it's a turnoff. Right? If there's value and you believe there's value, then you're probably not going to run away from it. And I look at it this way, taking away the cybersecurity marketing of what I do, taking cybersecurity out of it and just looking at pure marketing. If you think about what hits your personal inbox every day that makes you go, hey, I read that literally every single day. It's a sales thing, but they send me it once a day or 3 times a week, and I read it every single time. They're not selling me anything, but I can tell you, because me as an investor, I read CB Insights newsletter. I read Crunchbase's newsletter. I read, Morning Brew. I read the Hustle Fund letter. Why? Because they provide me things that I find value from in every single email. And when you do that, now I know when I need data on new companies, where do I know to go? Crunchbase, right? It's the big brand. It's what I go to literally probably 2 or 3 times a day when I'm doing corporate development style research. But they never once tried to sell me. They just provide me data to get the brand there, and I can come to them when the timing's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you know who to get a hold of, and you have that comfort level, and you have that trust built up because they put out something useful that is proven to be right. And I think that's a great example of where somebody can provide value.
Yeah, and I think it's more than not providing value, though, because again, from the perspective of somebody that, in a security role that is very emotionally tied into what they do, it really should be a relationship. Most selling in our market, in our B2B market, is very relationship focused. Very account based sales, and you don't want to kick that off with a lie, with haha, no, just sent that to get your attention, to get you to respond, and it worked. And again, I think there's that disconnect between the SDRs and the account managers, where their only job is to get responses, is to get meetings on a calendar. Oftentimes that's their primary KPI, is how many meetings did you get? So the way they get those meetings is not necessarily important to them, because they're not worried about a long-term relationship here. They're just trying to hit their quotas for the month.
Yeah. And being in their role is super tough. Like, I don't think that can be overemphasized. Like we talked about doing help desk jobs and really it being helpful to understand people and to grow empathy and so on. But I think for SDRs, it's a very difficult job. They're getting snide remarks all day long. They have a ton of pressure to meet certain numbers. They're often treated as disposable in a lot of orgs. And it's just a very difficult job. It's almost like hazing outside of university. If you survive being an SDR for a year, you could join some other role in the organization or something like that. It's tough, but if they get the tone right, they get the approach right, and then get you with somebody who can kind of build that relationship so that trust exists, it is very impactful and it is very valuable. But I think trust and building that relationship is key, because I remember one time I got told, okay, so in the coming year, we're doing, instead of classic EC2 servers, we're going to go do Kubernetes, and we're going to go get ISO 27001, and we're going to be in more than one cloud. We're going to be from AWS, also in Google Cloud. We're going to be in Azure, and so on. And how we're going to do security for that, for like logging and monitoring and so on. And basically, I was talking with a lot of different vendors for logging and monitoring, but there was one who really spent some time trying to understand, what it was that I was concerned about, what I was trying to solve for, and then to explain how their product could actually help take care of those things. And they worked very hard to establish trust and showing that they could do it. And that ended up kicking off a multi-year relationship that was mutually beneficial because of how great they are and how they cared about that. And so I think that's a very important aspect of vendor relationships.
And I think that is one of the keys, is that to fixing this, is that with SDRs, they need to understand that they need to do some research, put some time in. Like, I've seen a lot of CISOs complain, like how long does it take to figure out if I'm using AWS? Like, there's tools out there that can just, you can plug in a domain name and they can answer that question for you. And it takes time and patience. So SDR quotas, I think have to ramp up over time, because, it takes a while to get to that point, with some of these leads that they're going to be working. And if the incentives don't give you the time to go that patient relationship building route, then you're going to be burning bridges and maybe not even know it.
Yeah, and the organization can help with this stuff, right? Because in theory, there should be an ideal customer profile for your product. you should be able to do the research of like, these are the companies that meet that profile. And that's where SDRs can focus their energy. And by setting them up with the right information and tools and messaging, they can go and do the research to really tailor it to the company, to the individual, and really, adjust that. Like for where I work today at Gravity, you send me a message where it's all about helping the merchant. That's a lot more appealing to me because it aligns with the values of the company. How do we help that mom and pop shop on the corner? How do we make their life better? That's a lot more relevant to me than how do I maximize profit? But I may have worked somewhere else where it's like, okay, well, this is, pure ROI, dollars and cents conversation. How little can I spend to get the biggest bang for the buck kind of thing? But that's where, research can really help to make the message connect to the needs of that specific person and place.
Yeah. Well, Richard, I think that's some great advice. Hopefully we've helped some vendors out. I know we do have some vendors, investors, a whole very varied crowd that listens to this. So hopefully we got to some people and provided them some value.
Hopefully it's helpful, because the thing to understand too is like security professionals need to know about good security products, and they may not be aware that they exist in a very crowded field. So being made aware of it can be very useful, so I hope it's helpful for people that are going through the grind and trying to connect with people.
Absolutely. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me.
Stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk. What are we going to talk? We're going to talk with Ryan Kalember from Proofpoint about the latest threats.
The hybrid workforce is here to stay, and it requires real-time visibility, control, and rapid response of every endpoint, whether it's in the office or home. Tanium offers an endpoint management and security platform built for the most demanding IT environments. Many of the world's largest and most sophisticated organizations, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, rely on Tanium to deliver unmatched endpoint visibility and control. Whether you're preparing for zero trust or protecting your network from supply chain risk, Tanium empowers technology leaders to achieve greater agility, efficiency, and confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tanium. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, 78% say that working in the SOC is very painful. Yikes. On October 20th, Devo is establishing SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to you and encourage organizations to improve SOC analyst job satisfaction and mental well-being. Join Devo as they celebrate SOC analysts around the world and provide opportunities for personal and professional development, all while you unwind with programming specifically designed to help you de-stress. You can also win a Nintendo Switch if you participate in Devo's Twitter hashtag contest. All you have to do is follow at Devo_Inc. on Twitter and tweet using hashtag SOC Analyst Day. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to sign up and learn more.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, including Twitch, where you should probably change your password today.
Absolutely.
For reasons.
Change it immediately. Change it yesterday.
All right. Yeah. There might be passwords in it. They might be encrypted. We don't know yet. Journalists are still digging through the rubble of that data leak. This interview is sponsored by Proofpoint. Ryan Kalember joins us to kick off Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Today, we'll be talking about the latest work and threat research Proofpoint is up to. Ryan leads cybersecurity strategy there, and it's his job to make sure Proofpoint customers have the necessary context into current threats to make the best defensive moves possible. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Great to be here, Adrian.
Did I characterize your job correctly there? Because I was paraphrasing all over the place.
Yeah, more or less. I'm actually also a director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance, which puts on National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is now a global thing. So we can check that box. Everybody is now aware of cyber, which is great. Nice to do that every October. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The threat landscape is something that we're incredibly focused on. Obviously, I have the benefit of a massive team of threat researchers that really look into our segment of that world. Targeted attacks, mostly against people, mostly leveraging social engineering, but certainly no shortage of innovation on the attacker side on that front lately.
Yeah, and it almost feels kind of silly to have Awareness Month. It feels like it's because I'm in the industry, but you know, my family used to bring up cybersecurity topics a couple times a year. Maybe 10 years ago, something security related would be in the news that maybe affected them, maybe was just interesting. And now it's weekly. I feel like it's in mainstream news almost constantly.
That has absolutely shifted. And I don't think any of us really have to explain what we do in the way that we did decades ago. But I will say there is some value in Cybersecurity Awareness Month updating kind of the tropes that we've been teaching everybody for a very, very, very long time. Obviously, things like email phishing is still a thing. But one of the things I find interesting is that once you actually get into the details of what actual attacks that the average person might need to be aware of actually look like and how they function, there's some things that are really bad advice that we give out for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Hovering over a link isn't really going to help you these days, but learning not to run a macro in a spreadsheet from somebody you don't trust, that's a lot more valuable. So there are some interesting nuances to it that might be helping your friends and family, Adrian.
Yeah. And looking for the lock symbol.
Right. Exactly. Like, let's encrypt as a thing now. Looking for the green address bar. All these things that we've been actually trying to drum into people for 20 years with varying degrees of success. those have been largely left behind by the attackers. To your point, the green bar, one of the things that's fascinating about that is that, if you look at where a modern attacker gets their infrastructure, it's trusted cloud services. They're building on the same things that we are. Like, why wouldn't you use Google and Microsoft infrastructure if you can pop a bunch of Office 365 accounts and send your campaigns from there? You can host your payloads there too. And mousing over that link and seeing, oh, it points to OneDrive, that will actually give you a false sense of confidence and make you more likely to click on it and maybe engage with the social engineering. So there are fundamental things that have shifted there, while a lot of the training that we often do as part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, or for the rest of the year, of course, hasn't really caught up.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting as we shift through that. Passwords are still a big thing. I think we're multi-factor authentication has been available on most big websites for quite a while now, and a lot of people still aren't using them. You still see like some major company's Twitter account get hit where they didn't have 2FA enabled on it because they weren't using proper best practices for multiple people to manage one account. So they had it disabled.
Right. And you have actually, I think, the enterprise flavor of that as well, which tends to be, what you're doing on the Google Workspace or Office 365 side. And even if you do have MFA turned on the obvious interfaces, something that is very much worth paying attention to is whether you have things like basic authentication turned on for non-obvious interfaces. By default, you spin up a new Office 365 tenant, basic auth is still on. Google actually announced, I think was that yesterday?
I saw that. Yeah.
A really interesting move to try and move to multi-factor authentication without people's express consent, which I think is actually a fantastic step. We're going to have to break some of the classic assumptions around user experience if we're ever going to get off some of these treadmills that we've been on for, to your point, way, way, way too long.
But that's a year from now, right?
It is a year from now, and I think you have a similar parallel actually on the Microsoft side, where they said actually they were going to kill basic authentication into O365 tenants in favor of modern authentication. They keep pushing the deadline for that back and back and back. I think they've said it will be at least 12 months notice. So the earliest we could possibly see it is October of 2022. Which does not sound like a time frame I thought I would live through at this point. But ultimately, those moves have to be made, because if not, it's just going to be too easy for the attackers to do the same stuff they've always done, compromise credentials in the same way they've always done it, right, and then monetize it in the way that has proven to be really scalable, whether it's ransomware, business email compromise. All these techniques work equally well when you have all those resources at your disposal that we're not taking away from them.
Mr. Robinson, I think we're solidly in your area here.
Absolutely. I'm curious, like from your standpoint and like the visibility you guys are seeing, we haven't seen a real big shift in tactics from, outside of password sprays, right? Like, I think this is a good move in the right direction with things like basic auth going away, but we still end up with end users getting phished. We still have macros. Like I would see something like, people actually enforcing attack surface reduction rules or disabling macros as a bigger, out of the box default for Microsoft. Because at the end of the day, I don't have to really get credentials. I can just phish someone with a macro again. Like, that hasn't changed in the last 10 years. Is that still what you guys are seeing? And why do you think that is?
Oh, 100%. And we really can't spend enough time talking about macros. If you look at every single initial access broker that we track, they are reliant on one of two things. They're reliant on macros, or they're reliant on basically compressed executables, a RAR or a zip or a 7-zip or something, and just sending it to somebody with a password and asking them to just run their code, which is frankly the same thing that a macro is. And for whatever reason, Microsoft, in all the GPO settings and all of the things that you can do to Office to better protect it against macros, has just not made much progress against this. And when you have users running code, that's tough, even for an EDR system to find, right? To differentiate those very normal processes using all the same living off the land binaries that administrative tools use. it's a really hard problem once the user's running that code. And if you look at actually that attack surface reduction, which you very correctly pointed to, we occasionally think, oh, there's going to be a new vulnerability used in targeted attacks. And there was one last month, 4040444, which is, again, I cannot believe I'm saying this in 2021, the way you can use an ActiveX control inside an Office document or an RTF file, because as many of us still remember, there is Internet Explorer still, as much as we think we've gotten rid of it, inside Microsoft Office that is creating exactly this sort of attack surface that attackers have been using for so long, so productively. And even with that vulnerability actually being pretty great and working even through the preview pane, we saw 2 or 3 little campaigns there where we saw millions and millions of the same old macros, the same old compressed executables, the same old socially engineered, please run my code for me type attacks. The one thing that's worth mentioning on the attacker side, we did see an interesting shift in terms of how credential stealing malware works. That does keep up a little bit with 2FA. One of the interesting examples, I think a couple of months ago, was what happened to EA, where they had the Slack token get sold on a interesting marketplace. And then that was used by an attacker to then socially engineer the help desk into giving them a VPN login. Cookie reloading style attacks and making sure you can kind of steal that cookie with malware on the box is a great way to get around kind of traditional credential defenses. So that is a little bit new, but you're absolutely spot on. The attack surface is all kind of what it used to be because Microsoft Office is there and because it's so hard to train people not to run macros from sources they don't trust.
I mean, I think we're at that precipice where we will see kind of that next evolution, and you hinted to it. I've been saying this for probably 2 or 3 years now. Like single sign-on and SaaS are the next Office product for vectors. Like you don't even have to get access to internal networks anymore because of the data that's stored inside of these systems. I mean, you look at Teams, you look at O365, you look at Slack, even just Slack, a simple chat channel. I mean, files are shared, credentials are on there, code snippets end up in there, Git repository links, tokens, all of these single sign-on applications and SaaS applications and their integration into corporate and enterprise networks. This is going to be the next Office. I mean, Office is still there, and we still have IE and ActiveX. Like you said, I can't believe we're saying that in 2021, but that's there for a while, and I believe that will start to go away to an extent, but that doesn't mitigate anything. Even with 2FA, like you said, there's tokens, there's JWTs that are implemented improperly. You end up with cookies, all of these things that are going to be stealable from the browser, which is more and more relied on by end users day to day. This is not going away. So really good layered security and in-depth credential sprawl and user management and training and awareness are all going to be even more critical as we move forward.
So to that point, a question for you, Ryan. How much are we seeing people stealing from the browser, those OAuth keys? Like how they got into EA Games Slack. Basically by buying a stolen OAuth key is what it sounded like. Like, are there big marketplaces for that? Is that I know we've seen malware that will actively steal that stuff as kind of like a side note, right? Like that's not even the main purpose of the malware. It's just like while we're here on the host, we might as well just scoop up all this stuff.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, the multifunction modular nature of modern malware, especially the stuff that is designed to scale, absolutely can scoop up OAuth tokens and cookies and all of the various different key material that gets randomly scattered around different places. Like when you're malware on an endpoint right now, it's like a piñata. You're just trying to hit it and see what keys fall out. And it's kind of amazing that, yes, Mimikatz works for Azure AD when you're using browser logins. Like there's all this stuff that we thought we got rid of when we moved to our shiny cloud future that unfortunately still remains the same. I would say there's a couple of things worth paying attention to. Obviously, OAuth tokens can be sold in various different marketplaces. If you are an initial access broker, you're looking to monetize your access in lots of different ways. The other thing worth paying attention to, though, is basically fake third-party apps that work on OAuth tokens as well. If I'm going to try and phish you and you've got like a FIDO token, right? You're using, what I use, a YubiKey. How do I actually phish that person? That's tougher, right? But if that person can connect an OAuth app, some third-party thing, which can be generated by literally any Office 365 tenant, and they can actually authenticate to that app, meaning go to the real IDP, not actually ever expose their credential, the second factor, whatever it happens to be, to the attacker, but give that attacker an OAuth token that represents that access. That's the sort of thing that we've actually seen done at scale. There's one really fascinating threat actor that was doing that in the US and Mexico, and they were doing it from everything from fake Netflix lures all the way through to impersonating the Mexican tax authorities. And they were just using OAuth apps. So they were kind of our first O365 native threat actor trying to steal huge amounts of OAuth tokens that never expire. And even if you have that user change their password, the OAuth token doesn't die. So that's really reliable, durable access that in a marketplace is going to have value.
And those are hard to audit as well. You start to think about Azure AD or OAuth apps and all the different connections that these have. I mean, you just look at Azure AD and something like the SAML or AD Connect accounts. Like those are hard to audit, and those are highly privileged accounts that do a ton of things, and there's not a lot of apps to audit those. Then you start to talk about apps inside of O365 and all the different connections that end users make and give access to, because by default they're allowed to do that within the org unless you specifically start to lock that down, which no one is doing. This becomes a very widespread and sprawling set of credentials that, like you said, has long-term ramifications. And cleaning that up, good luck. This is already hard to do on-prem. You start to talk about having to do this at scale for a large org in the cloud on O365.
And some of these SaaS apps, you also don't have very much visibility into what somebody's doing with those tokens. So that you can see. In some of them, you can't even see if they're being used. Like in Google, I can authorize somebody or an application to look through my Gmail, and we saw a case a couple of years ago where there was this unsubscribe app that would go through your email and unsubscribe to things for you, unsubscribe newsletters and spam and all kinds of stuff. And it came out. I'm not sure. A lot of this was rumor, so I'm not sure how much of this was verified, but that Uber wanted access to all those inboxes that this unsubscribe app had, because they wanted to see when people created a Lyft account, and started to move off of Uber. They wanted those data points.
I mean, and that's exactly the sort of thing that an OAuth app would gather in a way that would be non-obvious. And I think to the broader point in this discussion, one of the things that really does matter here is that the attacker has to have a monetization strategy before this becomes a big problem worth actually focusing on. And the monetization strategy for most of the types of compromises that we've just been talking about is business email compromise. Getting into an inbox, figuring out when there's money moving from point A to point B, ideally via wire transfer, understanding that, and then impersonating one of the parties and redirecting those funds. There is a depressing reason why that is, according to the FBI's data, not only the biggest source of cybercrime losses, but bigger than all of the other ones put together. It's a simple attack. There's lots of ways to execute it, and it's accessible to anybody who knows how to find a money mule. And that's really, I think, yeah.
But Ryan, there are some threat actors that don't need to monetize, correct?
True. Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And if that's in your threat model, if you're Twitch today, maybe 4chan's in your threat model, there's lots of actors that definitely don't need to monetize. But if you think about, where our research is focused right now, we're focused on ransomware actors, who again rely primarily on email and other credential attacks. Obviously, there is vulnerability exploitation that happens from time to time, but the lion's share of what they do is still relatively targeted and either malware through the email channel or credential attack. And then the BEC guys. The BEC guys are much more cloud native than other types of actors because they don't have that traditional get that single point of presence, figure out how to drop creds, escalate privilege, move laterally, get to domain admin that a ransomware actor has to do. Yeah. But ultimately, a lot of the tradecraft just overlaps because they can use the same tools to do multiple different things.
And often for business email compromise too, you don't have to rely on, or you're not relying on your security. You're often vulnerable just because of the supply chain that you have, the vendors that you deal with. Those are the ones where the attacks are coming in, and you may have the best email security and visibility possible, and email is still going to come in that's spoofed or trying to do the business email compromise for a transaction, and there's nothing you can do about that. That's how business is conducted. They're utilizing the tools against how they're designed to be used. So that's where process and procedure and good playbooks and run books, and frankly, you really have to have an in-depth strategy that utilizes people and those checks and balances outside of technology in order to combat something like this.
Yeah, I think one of the things that scares me the most, one of the trends I've noticed that scares me the most is that a lot of cyber criminals, we're seeing a lot more patience. We're seeing bigger paydays and a lot more patience than we have in the past to get to those. So like in the BEC case, I've seen a lot of cases where they'll compromise an email account and they'll just sit there and learn the business processes for a while, just so that when they do send that BEC email, they know exactly how to time it. I worked one case where, it was a title and loan company, that did commercial real estate. And, these were 7-8 digit transactions. And they were waiting for that 1 hour window when somebody said, okay, it's time to make that transaction. And that's what they would go after, is to try and redirect that.
Exactly. And that's a really good example, but I hate to one up you, but I've got a 9-figure one.
Go for it.
that we were working on not actually just this summer. $194 million actual invoice owed from a very large company to a Chinese company, which had been compromised by a threat actor. And exactly as we were talking about, you're sort of at the mercy of your supply chain security in that sense. But that doesn't mean you can't use any intelligence whatsoever. In this case, actually, the threat actor wasn't just sitting on the email account just to learn how the business process worked. They were also staging malicious payloads there. They were using it for other attacks against other organizations. So even though this particular account only launched legitimate conversations with multiple people in accounts payable, because they were smart enough not to ask for $194 million all at once. They wanted to set up a payment plan. They were using that same compromised environment to do lots of other things. So if you can observe, hey, this is an Office 365 tenant that has all kinds of compromised issues, it's attacking somebody, I know to at least apply a greater degree of scrutiny to it. My defense in depth probably is still going to rely on my financial controls, my processes, and my people. But ultimately, you can at least do that analysis. And that's actually become an incredibly popular way to use our threat intel to figure out, of all the domains that are emailing you, which ones are sending attacks to people, which ones are not doing DMARC and the correct authentication protocols, and which ones are seeing a lot of lookalike domains. All of that is actually pretty observable, even if you are still, to some extent, always at the end of the day at the mercy of the security policies and processes of others that you don't fully control.
So is the next iteration of your security maturity and security roadmap also keeping an eye on your vendors and supply chain? I mean, from a attack surface reduction kind of model where we're looking at everything external to us, looking for doppelgangers, watching DNS, like all of the things that these companies are now monitoring. I wonder when it's going to start to include these supply chain and vendors, and you have to basically opt in order to do business from procurement.
It's a good point. And procurement systems themselves are fairly vulnerable. particularly because you have a lot of actors that want to get themselves created in the procurement system and are trying really, really hard to get that access because they know that that's the gateway to money. For organizations that have good controls, for smaller organizations, they still do things like change wire instructions based on emails. So they're going to be lower hanging fruit for some period of time. When it comes to the attack surface reduction, though, what we're really talking about is people. And I think the single most valuable view that we've put together for organizations lately is a view in terms of, you might have 100,000 employees, but how many of them are actually getting interesting attacks on a regular basis? It's probably about 5%. It might actually even be smaller than that. Some of it might be distribution lists, but it's not going to be everybody. So your attack surface is maybe on the people side, not as large as you think it is. At the same point in time, not all targets are created equal. Many are much more likely to engage with the social engineering than their coworkers. And identifying that in statistically significant ways, there's lots of ways to do it, of course. You want to be looking at things like who does their training, who clicks on links that are actually malicious, who is using MFA across all their accounts, all those sorts of things as data points to further shrink what is the riskiest portion of your people-based attack surface. And then, of course, you do want to overlay on that what actually matters. Who's getting attacked, who's likely to fall for the social engineering the attack depends on, and who has access to something at the end of the day that really matters to you, whether that's information, the ability to move money, maybe it's IT privilege if you're worried about a ransomware attack. If you put that analysis together, you can get down to usually a couple of hundred people that carry around most of the risk. And shrinking that pool and better protecting those people has really meaningful results in terms of risk mitigation.
I mean, that's what pen tests, that's what good security companies should be doing. And that's what the good companies that are doing this are looking at, the business risk. I mean, you're right, focusing that 90% of effort on the 10% of people or business critical assets that matter and mapping out what those risks are and trying to put mitigating strategies together for that. I think that's a much better approach. And again, there's not that many people that are actually looking at the business risk or putting together these analysis and statistics like you guys are. So bravo.
Thanks. Yeah, I totally agree also. And I think, the security leaders that are the most successful are the ones that can speak the language of business risk. And we in the vendor side of things don't usually make that very easy. So anything we can do in that direction generally helps.
Definitely. All right, Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today on Enterprise Security Weekly. That was really good stuff.
It's been a pleasure.
Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/proofpoint to learn more. And we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.
Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. Extra Hop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/extra hop.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We've got keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register and check out our rockstar lineup. Also, join us October 21st for a webinar on why zero-knowledge encryption matters from Keeper Security. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And now for the news. We've got some great stuff today. And first one here, Tyler, we're gonna Mr. Shields, we're gonna kick off with Orca Security. This one was just this was a huge funding round. So this was $550 million, but it was an add-on to the Series C, the previous Series C, which was 210. What's going on here, Tyler?
You know, I wish I had a good answer for this one. So it looks like $760 million in Series C since March, kind of a rolling close over, what is that, 7 months? Something like
7 months.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just can't in my brain at all figure out a revenue, and I was trying to do the math the other day, but to figure out a revenue plus growth percentage that takes us from
800%
million. Yeah, that was the number we came up with on a very seriously large number, which I know, well, rumor mill has it that they don't have that seriously large number of revenue required to justify a $760 million C round. But hey, you know, sometimes those rumor mills aren't right. They're off track, and you know, maybe there's an extra 0 or 2 on their revenue that I'm unaware of. But to go from 1.2 billion to 1.8 billion evaluation from March to October, that's absolutely insane. Now, you know, I beat it up with you a little bit, Adrian, over Slack when we saw this thing come out. Like, how do we get there? If we can't get there from a growth and revenue perspective and doing it from the financial side, can we get there from a strategic perspective and do it from a, you know, public comps / comparing to others that exist in market? And the only thing I can think of, the only storyline that makes any sense on this one is that they're pitching the line of, hey, look, you know, Palo Alto Networks does 300, 400 million, whatever they're doing on cloud security today. So obviously the space is $1 trillion market, right? It's a monster. It's a, you know, many hundreds of billions, big TAM. And given that, and the way that we do things we being Orca, do things compared to how Palo Alto Network actually executes their protection and detection, kind of that agentless model, rapid onboarding, the storyline must be a comp against Palo Alto. That's the only way that I can see that you can get a strategic investment that large on the most likely revenue run rates and multiples that they have.
Yeah, and to give you the full runway here, they started out with a relatively, at least, you know, these days, humble 20 million Series A in May 2020.
Humble.
It is today.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot's happening under a decade. And I think it was 2015 when Tenable raised $250 million in what was a Series B, but you know, they'd already been around for a while. They weren't a startup at that point, but like that was unbelievably huge. 250 million. I remember back when I was at 451 Research, we went through our database, and that was the biggest raise ever, biggest VC raise ever in cybersecurity. And almost once a month, we see something that beats that these days.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and now sitting there. You're sitting there staring at an $800 million total fundraise over 16 months from May of 20 to now, on a $1.8 billion valuation. It's just absolutely insane.
Yeah, so
Johnny, if you're listening, our producer, we need to have a big like WTF icon that we can pop up on the screen right now. Just be like, bang, that's what's got to come out right here. Thank you, Johnny.
So we've also got Wiz in this category, Lacework. There are certainly some other folks in this category, and it's interesting because it's already, it seems to me, a kind of a redo of a category that we already had here. So like we recently saw ThreatStack get acquired. Pretty lackluster acquisition there. Like paying back some investors. 68 million on over 70 raised. And, obviously, Orca and Wiz, these guys are doing a whole lot more, than ThreatStack and Cloud Passage and Dome 9 did back in the day. But still kind of the same space, kind of this workload, both workload security and the cloud management plane.
Yeah. It's a combo platter of CSPM, cloud security posture management, and runtime protection.
Side.
Right. Well, maybe, right? That's a small piece of it, but the two big things are CSPM plus runtime protection of cloud assets. And that's the Wiz and Orca storyline, right? They protect and they provide visibility. The traditional older ones were CSPM. And I've said it before, and I when I did put it on LinkedIn, I got beat up pretty bad by some vendors that disagreed with me. But I've said it before, CSPM is a market that I don't see lasting long, because if CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management, the ability to look at your cloud vendor and give you a structural analysis of just the cloud vendor in isolation, exists in every product, in every other market, right? In CWPP, in CNAP, in Next-Gen WAF, it's literally in every other market. Does that still need to be a market in isolation by itself? And the answer is no. So to me, the concept of CSPM is a fundamental component to supporting some other value proposition. In the case of Wiz, Orca, et cetera, they're saying it's that plus protection that they're going to find significant value from, right? In the case of JupyterOne, Axonius, and others, it's CSPM plus compliance plus visibility plus continuing analysis and alerting on change, more of a CMDB plus CSPM play. So, I think at the end of the day, like ThreatStack didn't have the greatest protection side of it. They were more of a pure play CSPM. They couldn't get the exit they wanted. And some of the other more traditional players that you mentioned are the traditional CSPM guys, right? And so that market's just rapidly shrinking and turning into these new, let's take multiple things and roll them together kind of plays. And that's where Wiz and Orca and Laceworks are trying to become different.
And, there's always the, kind of the boogeyman, are the public cloud platforms that these products are built upon, right? Like AWS, Azure, Microsoft, they can introduce stuff here that can kind of pull out the rug, no?
They could. I think that's always the hard part of anything right now is where that shared security model and where that demarcation point comes into play between, say, the CISO of the organization itself. What is the CISO in the organization responsible for, and where does that then demarcate to the CSP itself? And then with the CSP, there's a second demarcation point of, hey, we're not going to go above this. We're going to let vendors take these sections, right? And I think historically, they can and have pulled the rug out from under vendors in the past. But historically, they tend to let the more advanced technologies and techniques run their course and provide a lighter weight version that doesn't quite match in value prop over time, right? And so I don't think that's too much of a worry for the Wizzes and Orcas of the world, but there is a chance.
But then there's the argument is, what AWS has given me, is that good enough? sure, it's not as much as I could get with this other product, but I think also traditionally what we've seen is that, in certain categories, if it's there, and it's meeting the compliance requirement, a lot of people are just going to stop there. It's going to be good enough for them. They're not going to go for the extra features.
That's certainly true, and it's going to apply downward price pressure on folks that are CSPMs. And I think that's where Wiz and Orca have a good vision, in the sense that they can look and see, protection being a second thing above and beyond CSPM, right? And that's harder. It's going to be more difficult for Amazon or the CSPs in general to roll out.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I saw here, like malware detection is a big thing in this space, which I thought was kind of odd to see here.
I'm not even sure why that's a big thing, to be honest with you. Maybe you read the articles closer than I did, but malware in what? Malware in running containers that are running in instances?
Yeah.
Is that the thing?
But how does that EC2 change? Instances and containers, yeah.
So this has always boggled my mind, and maybe this is my, as my son likes to call it, my old head, right? If a container is just a host, and we take that said host and put it in the cloud, and we don't leverage a ton of cloud native, and even if we do leverage a ton of cloud native calls, what's the difference between antivirus on that host and antivirus or any other technology on hardware, right? Very, very little fundamentally. Now, if we start to say we're going to take that host and we're going to break up and use cloud native services in a highly advanced way with advanced scaling, horizontal, vertical, then it is fundamentally different. And do we really need even AV at that point, right? But if you're just jamming containers into the cloud and going, hey, this is our cloud native strategy, then yeah, you still need AV. You still need all the same things you do on bare metal or wherever you're running that basic container, right? So, it's interesting. You've got all of these players. Like if you look at the CWPP market, the Cloud Workload Protection Platform market, that's kind of the reinvention of traditional AV on host, right? And what they're doing is being more intelligent about how they run in the cloud. But in essence, it's just
usually it's agentless
technologies, right? In the cloud. Yeah. Could be. Many of them require agents as well to get the depth of analysis within the container itself. Right. It just, they can run as a sidecar alongside the container. They can be jammed in as a true agent within the container. Whatever gets them below the host and operating system, and gives them the hooks they need at that fundamental layer.
Right.
Integrating with the other cloud places, those things like your data lake and what APIs you're able to push info to, and scalability. You have somewhat limited scalability on bare metal with inside a premise based on budget and pipe and such. Mm-hmm. But I think that's where they're trying to differentiate. But you're right. This is all the same thing with a different location, or even it's not even that. It's just a different model, and I think they're getting a ton of money out of it, where it's not providing as much value as other things should be, such as credential monitoring, credential sprawl, credential access, and mitigations.
Yeah, so fundamentally I think there's a couple of interesting things here. I use this a lot. I hope I haven't actually said this analogy on this particular podcast, but I think enterprises today are going through a multi-stage thing. You've got the old school enterprises still got stuff in bare metal sitting in their data centers, multiple data centers around the world, et cetera. Step one after that is to take an app or a server or a service, chuck it into a container and shove it into a single cloud. And they say, hey, we're now cloud. Okay, great. You're not at all. You don't get any of the benefits, and you get a lot of additional headache. But that's actually where most enterprises that I talk to today currently are. They're not leveraging cloud in any true cloud native way that gives them scalability, that gives them the ability to use the platform in the correct way. The next step is then saying, okay, we're going to take that service, app, whatever it is, the host, and break it up and make it into its smaller microservice model, multiple services, leveraging horizontal vertical scaling, cloud native approach, program the correct way. And that's true cloud native computing. Most enterprises aren't there yet, which is why, to take it back to the conversation about Orca, Wiz, and all of these cloud-centric markets, there's so much potential there, is because those markets are completely untapped. The enterprise just hasn't completed, or hasn't even started many of the times, that shift. And so, that progression as it gets faster will drive significant revenue to anybody that's in a truly cloud-centric version of what they do. Now, the problem is a lot of the vendors haven't figured out how to actually operate in that new world. And the ones that will operate in that new world well are the ones that are agentless, can look at things from an outside in, and can connect data not just from one CSP, but from 2 or 3 different cloud providers and an identity provider and on-premise products, and collect all of that data and make that actionable. That's where the future is going to be on true cloud security.
You mean a single pane of glass?
Don't use those words. Hate those words.
All right,
but
Johnny,
in essence, I don't actually mean single pane of glass. What I specifically mean is understanding how things connect and interoperate between those different components, not just surfacing the issues, but saying, hey, what happens if I give permission in my IDP for X? How does that cascade amongst all of my assets or all of my other components that I have in multiple cloud endpoints and apps, right? That's where true value will come from.
And the nature of cloud is we've got this rolling technology rollout that just is never going to end, where they're constantly introducing new products. And when they introduce those, these are now gaps in visibility and attack surface. And like often, for example, when AWS will roll stuff out, it doesn't work with CloudTrail right off the bat. Like you got to wait a while, and developers and folks are wanting to try it out and check it out and integrate it as quickly as they can. And, again, security, I think, is going to be in this uncomfortable spot of being the folks saying, hey, could we hold off a bit? Could we pump the brakes a little bit here? But that was something I constantly saw through years of going to AWS reInvent, was that these new, really cool, really interesting looking technologies would come out, and they'd be like, yeah, but they're only in these regions, and they don't connect with these other products that we have yet. You can't get logs from it yet.
Yeah. So actually, I want to use this opportunity to transition to the next article that I want to talk about, Adrian, if you're cool with that.
Sure. Yeah, go.
Because it's similar along the lines of this is our WTF icon again. SNCC, $8.5 billion valuation on a $530 million round. Now, the interesting thing here is I do think that they may have the appropriate revenue growth rate. They've been around long enough. They're seeing significant, multi-hundreds of % year-over-year growth for like 4 or 5 years now. So they might actually be more reasonable, certainly on an IPO track, but $8.5 billion, that's crazy. Amazing valuation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's and we talked, that was one of the other ones we've seen this year, just a huge raise. And it's the reason it's here is Salesforce and Atlassian wanted a piece of it and threw in $75 million on top of all that other stuff that we've seen. And
how do you expect to get a return on putting $300 million on an $8.5 billion valuation? What type of return are you hoping for?
You never get a return on that. Maybe that's the goal. That's a lot of places' goal is to dump that money, but
yeah, we're just in such a weird over cash-rich investment environment right now that it's just a seller's game.
And I don't have the numbers on it, but we are seeing quite a few security startups, going on the cheap, that are not getting good exits. And I just wonder how many of these are going to end up. FireEye is a great example. FireEye, went IPO. I think kind of the classic case of fake it till you make it, where what they had product-wise when they went IPO that gave them the stock to be able to acquire Mandiant, like so thin what they had. They basically had that NX appliance, and that was it. And what the NX appliance could do and the value that it brought to customers and in the industry just did not justify the amount of financial value that was attached to that company. And they really struggled to kind of build that into a platform. And, to 2014 me, when I was writing up the deal analysis for Mandiant, in 2012 me, when I was using the FireEye NX product, those versions of me are not surprised to see this, to see them acquired by STG for something less than 2x and then merged with McAfee Enterprise.
Yeah, what I will say is when we were first seeing all these cyber unicorns popping up, let alone decacorns, but the original unicorn run like 10 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it is now, I was telling all my friends, this has got to be nuts. Really, $1 billion? This is crazy talk. And here I am now, we're talking about bumping up against $10 billion numbers. And so future Tyler, when you come back and look at this, you were an idiot and you got it wrong, just as always.
And it cracks me up that the title in this article is McAfee Enterprise FireEye products to merge into $2 billion Titan. Like, there's nothing Titan about. But like you have to forget all the history to put something like that in the title there. Intel acquired McAfee for $7.68 billion back whenever that happened. 2010. Like, they have lost so much value.
Wow, who was left holding the bag? That's the question.
And I'm curious to see how this merger plays out, because like just thinking about those two products and how different those products are both deployed, managed, and the strategy that they use, like getting those to bolt on to each other and make something that's viable or usable to the consumer in order to hit those $2 billion marks. I don't envy.
There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap there. Like I remember there was a rumor a while back that Cisco was going to acquire FireEye, and I just thought it was ridiculous because, there's such a huge amount of overlap between the companies. It just made absolutely no sense. And I think it's one of those rumors that somebody throws out to try and see if they can get, stock numbers to move or something like that. But yeah, I think it was Seeking Alpha is where I saw that announced, that rumor announced, and here we are. Huge amount of overlap here between these two companies. I was actually back when STG acquired FireEye, or the product side. Mandiant is now, I think the public FireEye was officially renamed Mandiant, but yeah, I was kind of thinking we'd see RSA thrown in here as well. That'd be more of a threesome, but I don't know what they're going to do with RSA because STG has RSA also sitting in the wings.
The cyber roll-ups continue. That's the thing. These PE firms are just buying, acquiring, and squeezing blood from the turnips.
Yeah. The other interesting acquisition was the Akamai Guardicore one. Like that one. Like the Zero Trust stuff and Guardicore in general, like it's a good product. It's super useful. They've had a lot of traction, and honestly, they provide quite a bit of value. They're very, very expensive, and they have a massive sales force that I'm not sure how Akamai is going to leverage this. That seems like a strange matchup for what Guardicore had already accomplished.
So if you take into account their acquisition of Soha, which was back then it was called SDP, Software Defined Perimeter. Today it's called ZTNA. That gives them a piece of connectivity into the enterprise. The idea with Soha is basically provide reverse proxy tunneling into the enterprise for people externally to access internal applications without having to expose anything to the public internet. Including like fat clients and stuff like that, not just web-based stuff. So this, I guess I could see this being a kind of a natural extension of putting together a Zero Trust, story. And
that is true. The Guardicore product too was very, very good at the visibility side of this. So their ability to detect, isolate all the way down to the process and network layer with that reverse proxying. This actually could be an interesting product to see to fruition. Again, Akamai, they've got money, I guess. It's an interesting leader of the ship, we'll call for this product line. But I think it's the two together might be an interesting product at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I'm surprised someone else didn't pick up Guardicore, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question now. Like we were talking about earlier, there are all these companies who've raised a huge amount, and I mentioned it in the notes for this one. Like, what happens with Illumio? They've raised 5 times more than Guardicore here. Who's going to buy them? Because it's really looking like microsegmentation ended up kind of like NAC, kind of like a niche security control that's difficult to implement organization wide. So they just never hit the market penetration I think they initially planned on when they raised all that money.
It's a big investment. I mean, Zero Trust is a huge undertaking from a project standpoint anyway, and it's a big investment from a company. I mean, it does solve a ton of problems, but it is not as easy as any of the vendors make it seem.
Like NAC solved a lot of problems. App whitelisting solved a lot of problems. But the problem was you couldn't implement it, the way that you would need to for it to solve all those problems.
Especially for year-over-year costs with the subscriptions that they were charging. I mean, you're in $1 million just to get the project going. It takes a year to deploy and get your test bed done and functioning, and then you're up for renewal for another $1 million. So what's your total return on investment and cost of ownership over however long it takes to get fully deployed?
Yeah, I mean, there are all these breathless takes back in 2009, 2010 about how, app whitelisting, Bit9 was basically, going to make AV obsolete, because we're just going to lock everything down and, malware wouldn't be able to run because it wouldn't be in the in the allow list. And
we saw how well that went.
Complete nightmare. Doesn't work. Like humans and businesses aren't compatible with that idea. And we still see a lot of startup segments and startups pop up that don't take that into account. And immediately when you see them, you're like, literally, that was my first question for Illumio when I briefed with them. I said, how is your product not going to be like going from managing 8 firewalls to 8,000? How are you going to handle that?
Same response. Crickets.
Yeah. No, that was they did not have an answer for that. And I really wanted them to be able to figure that out. I mean, it's something that you see in like the Firemon space, where they try and do the analysis for you on how to manage those rules. And it's just I think if they nailed that, Illumio would have had an IPO by now or would have been picked up by somebody. And I don't think it's going that route. All right. What else do we have here? So just a few funding items I'm going to just touch on. Privacy engineering is really hot now. Now we've got 2 Tonic AI and Duality technologies. And then there's a third that I can't mention yet because it's under embargo, but all Series B, all around the same amount. And, pretty humble, straightforward, but very necessary, I think. The whole idea here is we need data in dev testing environments, stuff like that, that's scrubbed, that's not sensitive data, so that we don't need the same security around those environments. What's your take on these, Tyler?
So
I can't just say Tyler. You're both Tyler.
Yeah, no, yeah. Which Tyler? Tyler S.
Shields.
Tyler R. Shields.
I was going to ask Shields.
Me. Yeah. So I honestly, my understanding of the space is limited. So Adrian, if I read this right, it's taking real data, auto scrubbing it, putting it into production systems that allow you to execute against similar yet secure data.
Yes. So some of them do that. Tonic, I think, does base it off your existing data. But my understanding there is they're actually generating fake data from scratch that's informed by the real data.
Got it. And how big are the rounds that we are seeing here?
35, 30 Series Bs.
Series Bs. Well, they must be getting enough traction to make it somewhat worthwhile, right? But my first question is, is there enough there? Is there enough demand and need?
I don't know.
There? But I guess so. I mean, if they're getting a B. So,
I think, again, this is going to be a niche. Like, you've got to be a company that's large enough, and has complex enough data models to need a product to do this. Otherwise, it's kind of like, well, there's this GitHub project and that works fine for me.
Yeah, that's my concern. That's my concern with these rounds is, are we going to see these companies find enough revenue to justify the round, or is it just, hey, let's put in 30, we'll get this thing flipped at 150, make 5x and run for the hills? I don't know. It's going to be an interesting market to follow, mostly because I'm not a pure engineer. Like, I'm a former recovering engineer. Yeah. I've moved away from it over the years. So, I don't know the actual need for this, but obviously there's something if there's money going into it.
It'd be a good question for the folks over at Application Security Weekly.
Yes, it would, and then I would also love to get Tonic or one of those guys on here to discuss exactly their market segment. I'd love to hear more about it. I think it's an interesting space.
Yeah. See what we can do about that. Let's see. What else did we have here? I think I need to refresh here. I added one at the last minute that was kind of like a data lake, data analytics play.
Yeah, Gravwell.
Yeah, that's $3 million in seed funding. Kind of in that what I used to jokingly call SIM for your SIM. Where basically give me the data that you already have somewhere else that's not doing a good job of correlating it and finding insights, and we'll do that better.
Yeah, and I think Gravwell is a really underrated product, honestly. Like, they're kind of a homegrown bootstrap. Love the guys over there. They do a great job. Their product's fantastic. It is surprising what it takes to actually get that public visibility and that marketplace recognition kind of out of the gate. I think this will probably help them a little bit, but I also worry, like, small companies doing this bootstrap, as soon as they get money, like, it changes things, and it always does. So hopefully this changes things in a good way for them.
Yeah. I mean, so it's a space where, really, like the SIMs never got there. Like, they ended up focusing all their time and effort, in my opinion, on just getting the data in there, building a whole bunch of parsers, and just didn't have the right product team to build the analytics side to be able to do all that correlation and pull out all those useful insights without tons of alert fatigue. So yeah, we desperately need somebody to solve this, and
especially with only really 2 or 3 big players in the market, right? That do this. Mm-hmm. I mean, you run into, you've got an overwhelming amount of data in Splunk, and then you end up with a huge subscription fee that no one can afford on data that you can't parse because it's just too big and there's too much delay. Yeah. Or you end up with Elk, where you got a partially free system that no one knows how to use because it's all open source and it takes a ton of training and the skill set to parse that data. Then you have 2 problems. And then you end up with something like Gravwell that can do a lot of this and limit some of that data, but they're just not being applied into those 2 spaces because, again, you're over-SIMmed already and not utilizing what you already have.
Yeah, and the problem with the SIMs is that there's a lot of dev work there. I used to say you shouldn't call them products. You should think of them more as development platforms. Because I actually did know folks who were very happy with their SIM, but they had full-time SIM developers, that were actually building all the reporting and the data analytics on top of that. Same thing for Splunk. Most places that are happy with Splunk have all kinds of custom tooling and apps that they've created on top of it. So it's we definitely need something that doesn't have those huge development requirements. Otherwise, this security analytics is never going to reach a certain level of market penetration and be useful.
So you do end up with that gap, though. Now you just said it, right? Like, that limits all the way up to enterprise. So you end up with large business that doesn't have developers, that doesn't have security staff already, that's over fatigued. Small to medium business is left out. There's not a great market space for them to use most of those products. And then you start to think about small shops with large budgets, but again, you have no developers and no time. So there's a bunch of problems here, I think, in this space that have not been solved yet.
Yeah, opportunity to crack it. But all right, let's run through some of this stuff real quick. I feel like we're starting to run long here. NetApp acquired Cloud Checker. So Cloud Checker was kind of, they started out like focusing on cloud pricing, kind of pivoted into the same space as Evident.io, which became part of Palo Alto Prisma. So finally got kind of a late acquisition. Both names I hadn't heard in a while. I hadn't heard NetApp or Cloud Checker in a while. And One Identity, which is part of Quest, which got spun out of Dell, acquired OneLogin, which back in the day, Okta, Ping, and OneLogin were kind of the big three in the IAM space, big three platforms competing.
Didn't OneLogin acquire somebody last week too? Didn't they grab Tugboat? Maybe was that OneLogin who grabbed Tugboat? Quick, everybody to the Googles.
I'm actually testing a beta of a new search engine called U.com. So I'm not going to the Googles at the moment. OneTrust. That would be OneTrust.
OneTrust. There's too many ones out there. OneLogin, OneTrust, one this, one that.
One Identity acquired OneLogin. So they should also acquire OneTrust so we can, combine all the ones. We just get rid of all that confusing namespace collision. Oh, man. That's great. Dimitri posted a One Love GIF.
I love it. Also, I saw in the chat, NFT Ape has told us that I was saying ukulele wrong. It's an ukulele. So just for those who care, it's an ukulele. Thank you, NFT Ape, for giving me the correct pronunciation.
Nice. All right. Let's see. I'm going to skip a few things in here. If you haven't had a chance, I've got a link to the blog post on how Facebook managed to Thanos snap itself. And the short version is they have, and the reason I say Thanos snap is that they apparently have tooling that allows you to take entire data centers off the internet. Like just, they stop advertising BGP, which means DNS doesn't work anymore. To make it easy to run new fiber, stuff like that, take these big locations offline, and somehow manage to use that tool to take everything down all at once.
So they did that to themselves? Is that what I'm hearing?
They did.
Seems like a useful feature.
It sounded like a command fat finger, and they even had some tooling in place, some kind of throttling, some kind of alarm tooling that's supposed to prevent that kind of wide scale taking things offline, but it failed to prevent it. So, that's what they're doing right now is trying to figure out, why the sanity checks failed and allowed it to happen. All happened very, very quickly, and took them a while to get back up and running because they needed physical access to things and had done a lot of security work to make it difficult to do anything malicious with physical access to things. So, and all their tooling for troubleshooting was down.
Yeah, but so it makes it difficult to do anything malicious, but it also makes it very difficult to do anything.
Yes.
So well done, guys.
Yeah.
Common security problem.
And finally, for our squirrel of the week here.
There they are. I love them.
Move on to that. While Facebook was down, Twitter had some fun, basically tweeted, hello, basically everyone. And it's funny because Twitter was actually kind of struggling a bit. LinkedIn was struggling a bit because all these people that were normally wasting their time on Facebook had to go find somewhere else to hang out with people, be social, and spend some time. And I think those other platforms got hit kind of hard. But Twitter jumped on it, and just fantastic stuff came out of that. Like one of my favorites was Oscar Mayer replied to their hello, and they replied to Oscar Mayer and said, can we have the keys to the wiener truck? Some of the apps that were down, some of the brands that were actually down along with Facebook, like Instagram and WhatsApp, said hello. WhatsApp said hello, and Jack Dorsey replied to it and said, thought this was supposed to be encrypted.
Wow, that's
the favorite one I saw was it was something to the effect of, "Hello, we're the hackers that took down Facebook. If you don't pay us $700 million in cryptocurrency, we will turn it back on and unleash it on society again."
So I can do you one better than that. Did you see IDF's Twitter response?
I did not.
So they replied and said, if you need any help, IDF, which is Israel Defense Forces, if you don't know, IDF tech support is active and always ready to lend a hand. You can imagine the replies to that one.
Oh my gosh. Nothing like a government agency hopping on making fun of you. The trend was real. The meme was real.
Microsoft Teams got in there. They say unmutes Mike. Hey, everyone. So a lot of self-deprecating stuff in there. There was some what's that show called? Squid.
The Squid Game.
Yeah, Squid Game. There was a congratulations, you made it to the next round.
Yeah, I saw one. WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook eliminated. Only Twitter makes it to second game.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Some really good responses there. One of my favorite GIFs. Somebody had the Mr. Bean GIF where he's sitting next to somebody who's in a wheelchair with like a full body cast, basically, and he's looking at them. He's like, like crossing and uncrossing his legs because he has full mobility. So and they put the Twitter icon on Mr. Beam and. All of Facebook's brands on the person in a full body cast.
You gotta love it.
Good stuff. All right. So I think that's, you don't have any other favorites from that. I think we'll go ahead and close things out. Tyler, thank you for joining me today.
As always, brother.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. And a big thanks to everyone for watching and listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.